Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Martina, and today we're diving into one of the most disturbing true crime cases in American history. It's a story that shocked investigators, terrified an entire community, and left many people asking the same haunting question: how could someone who appeared so ordinary hide something so dark? When most people think of serial killers, they often imagine someone who looks suspicious, dangerous, or obviously troubled. But history has repeatedly shown us that some of the most terrifying criminals are the ones who seem completely normal. They blend into society, hold regular jobs, maintain relationships, and often earn the trust of those around them. That's exactly what makes cases like this so chilling. Today's story centers on Dana Sue Gray, a woman who would eventually become one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Before her crimes were uncovered, she was known as a licensed vocational nurse living in California. She appeared to be a hardworking professional with a stable life. Neighbors didn't see a monster. Friends didn't see a killer. To many people, she was simply another woman trying to build a successful future. But beneath that seemingly ordinary exterior was a secret that investigators would later uncover in horrifying detail. To understand how this story unfolded, we need to go back to the beginning. Dana Sue Gray was born in California and spent much of her early life appearing relatively unremarkable. Unlike some infamous criminals whose childhoods were marked by extreme violence or criminal behavior, there weren't obvious warning signs that pointed toward the crimes she would eventually commit. This is one of the reasons her case continues to fascinate criminologists and true crime researchers. As she grew older, she pursued a career in healthcare and became a nurse. Nursing is a profession built on trust, compassion, and care. People rely on nurses during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. The profession carries a level of respect because it requires empathy and dedication. Yet appearances can sometimes be deceptive. By the early 1990s, Dana Sue Gray was facing serious financial difficulties despite trying to maintain a lifestyle she could no longer comfortably afford. Her financial situation was deteriorating. Debt was mounting, expenses were increasing, pressure was building. Investigators would later discover that money played a major role in the crimes that followed. What makes this case especially disturbing is that Gray did not target wealthy celebrities, powerful business leaders, or individuals involved in criminal activity. Instead, she focused on elderly women living alone. These victims were often vulnerable. Many trusted strangers. Some were physically unable to defend themselves effectively. They represented exactly the type of targets that a predator seeking easy access and minimal resistance might choose. In 1994, the violence began. The first attacks initially appeared confusing to investigators. There was no obvious connection that immediately pointed toward a single offender. Communities often struggle to imagine that a serial killer could be operating in their neighborhood, especially when the crimes don't fit the stereotypical image people expect. But as more incidents occurred, investigators started noticing patterns. Victims were elderly women. Robberies often accompanied the attacks. The level of violence was shocking. Fear began spreading throughout the community. Families became concerned for aging relatives. Elderly residents became more cautious. Law enforcement agencies increased their efforts to identify whoever was responsible before another tragedy occurred. What nobody knew at the time was that the person responsible was living an apparently ordinary life while carrying out these brutal crimes. One of the most frightening aspects of serial killer psychology is compartmentalization. Some offenders develop an ability to separate their public identity from their criminal behavior. To coworkers and acquaintances, they may appear completely normal. Meanwhile, they are secretly committing acts that are almost impossible to reconcile with the image they present to the world. Dana Sue Gray appeared to possess this ability. As investigators dug deeper into the murders, evidence slowly began pointing in her direction. Financial transactions, stolen property, and other investigative leads started creating a picture that could no longer be ignored. The breakthrough eventually came when law enforcement connected stolen items and suspicious financial activity to Gray. As detectives assembled the evidence, the case against her became increasingly difficult to explain away. When authorities searched her residence and reviewed financial records, they uncovered information that painted a disturbing picture of greed, deception, and violence. According to investigators, Gray's motivation appeared heavily connected to financial problems and a desire to maintain a lifestyle she could not afford. While many people experience financial stress, almost nobody responds with violence. That's what makes this case so difficult to comprehend. The murders were not acts of desperation committed in a single moment of panic. Investigators believed they reflected a pattern of deliberate decision-making. Victims were selected, crimes were carried out, property was stolen, and afterward, normal life appeared to continue. For many people following the case, that contrast was impossible to understand. How could someone spend part of the day working in a caring profession and another part planning violent attacks? How could someone interact with patients, co-workers, and neighbors while hiding such horrific secrets? Those questions remain central to discussions about criminal psychology today. When Dana Sue Gray was finally arrested, the news sent shockwaves through the community. Residents who had been living in fear finally had answers, but those answers brought a new kind of horror. The suspect wasn't a stranger passing through town. She wasn't a drifter with no ties to the community. She wasn't someone hiding in the shadows. She was a local resident with a professional career and an outwardly normal life. As the case moved through the legal system, prosecutors presented evidence linking Gray to multiple murders and attacks. The details revealed during court proceedings painted a grim picture of the crimes and their devastating impact on victims and families. Media coverage intensified as the public learned more about the case. True crime enthusiasts, psychologists, and journalists all became interested in understanding what could drive a person to commit such acts. The trial highlighted not only the physical evidence, but also the broader questions surrounding motive and mental state. Experts examined various factors, including personality traits, financial pressures, and behavioral patterns. Yet even after years of analysis, many observers remain convinced that no single explanation fully captures the complexity of the case. Human behavior is often more complicated than simple answers. The public frequently wants a clear explanation when horrific crimes occur. People want to identify one event, one diagnosis, or one moment that transformed someone into a killer. But reality is rarely that simple. Cases like Dana Sue Gray's remind us that criminal behavior often emerges from a complicated combination of personal choices, psychological factors, circumstances, and opportunities. Eventually, Gray was convicted and sentenced for her crimes. For the victims' families, the verdict provided a measure of justice, though no courtroom outcome could ever erase the pain that had been inflicted. The community that had lived through months of fear could finally begin healing, yet the legacy of the case continues decades later. Criminologists still study female serial killers because they represent a relatively rare category of offender. Public perception often assumes serial killers are almost always male, but history has shown that female offenders can be just as dangerous. What's particularly striking about Dana Sue Gray's case is how effectively she concealed her violent behavior behind a respectable public image. Her story serves as a reminder that appearances alone rarely tell the full story about a person's character. Today, the case remains one of the most discussed examples of female serial homicide in modern American criminal history. It continues to appear in documentaries, books, forensic psychology courses, and true crime discussions because it challenges many assumptions people have about who commits violent crimes and why. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson from this case is not the violence itself, but the realization that evil does not always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it wears ordinary clothes, sometimes it holds a respected job, sometimes it smiles, makes conversation, and appears completely normal. And that's what makes stories like this so unforgettable. The crimes committed by Dana Sue Gray left behind grieving families, frightened communities, and questions that continue to echo decades later. While justice was ultimately served through the legal system, the case remains a powerful reminder of the importance of investigative persistence, forensic evidence, and the determination of law enforcement officers who refuse to stop searching for answers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy detailed true crime stories, criminal psychology breakdowns, and fascinating real-life investigations, be sure to subscribe and join us for more cases that reveal the darkest and most complex corners of human behavior. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.